Well, hi there. This is a cat. And this is a dog. This is also a cat. And this is also a dog. This looks like a dog, but it is closer to being a cat. This is called a sea lion, but it's closer to being a dog. And this is a panda. It's a bear. And this is a panda. It's not a bear. But you know what they all are? Carnivorans. And I recognize that they aren't all carnivores, but they are all part of the diverse and amazing mammal clade Carnivora, which certainly does not contain all carnivores, but it does include most of the carnivorous mammals. And if it's not the single coolest mammal clade, it certainly has to be part of the discussion. Plus, if you're ever going to get killed and eaten by a mammal, odds are it'll be one of these guys. So let's dig into the Carnivora. What they are, how they're related, and which ones are the most likely to eat you. Oh, and I think we need to finally try to figure out what this is. Okay, so Carnivora. Carnivorans are placental eutherian mammals most closely related to ungulates like horses, antelopes, and whales. Possibly pangolins as well. Yeah, we probably need to dig into that group here pretty soon. But whereas most ungulates are herbivores, most carnivorans are carnivores, at least on some level. Which isn't to say that a cow will not eat a little bird when given the chance. And I won't show you that. Some of you guys didn't like it when I showed you that before. Interestingly, in a video on some of the members of this very clade. But carnivorans are not only willing to opportunistically eat meat like a cow, but in many cases, they're built to procure it. And here is a question that I once had about this group and how they procure meat. Cats, when compared to dogs, seem like they have a lot more going for them. They can get larger, they're often smarter, they're better leapers, they can be faster, they have devastating claws in addition to a devastating bite. Dogs often work well in groups, but cats can as well. In a world where cats exist, how have dogs managed to compete? I do now have an answer to this question, but it is definitely one that I think we should address in this video. So let's dive into this clade. Carnivorans can be identified generally by their large canine teeth and their 3 lower incisors, though reduced numbers are found in some groups. Their eyes tend to be forward facing, and they generally have 4 back toes and 5 on the front, but that too is not a hard and fast rule. What truly unites them as a group is ancestry. The group Carnivora is divided into 2 major clades. The Feliformia, the cat-form carnivorans, and the Caniformia, the dog-form carnivorans. To get to that dogs versus cats question, we will clearly need to discuss both groups. But to figure out what this is, well, both of the good options are in the Feliformia. So let's start with the cat-form carnivorans, and then we'll make our way over to man's best friend and his smelly and seafaring cousins. And the one thing that best identifies members of the Feliformia are these 2 lumps on the bottom of the skull. These are called the auditory bullae, and in feliforms, each one has 2 chambers divided by a bony septum that you can see if you look in through this hole right here. Completely divides the 2 chambers. So that is the best way to tell them apart from the Caniformia. And it works really well if you find a skull, like this one here that my brother-in-law found. But it can get you into a lot of trouble at the zoo if you're trying to spot that on the animals there. So to keep you out of zoo jail, I'll tell you that felids also tend to have shorter snouts and fewer teeth than caniforms. And within the Feliformia, there is a group of animals called civets. They go right here. I only bring them up because the family of extant feliforms least closely related to all of the other members of the Feliformia is the family Nandinidae, a family which today includes only 1 species, the African palm civet, which is not a civet. In fact, to find a living animal less related to civets, you would need to go completely outside of the Feliformia. There is not a single living feliform less related to civets than our African palm civets. Though civets, along with all of the remaining feliforms, are the closest living relatives of African palm civets. So these aren't civets, but at a glance, I can see how they got that name. They do look a great deal like civets. African palm civets live in Central Africa, south of the Sahara Desert, and look a bit like a spotted cat had a baby with a meerkat. So you ended up with kind of a weasel-shaped spotted brown or gray creature with a cat-like, but too long to be a cat, and definitely a tad mongoose-ish face. But then you got sad that it didn't look enough like a cat, so you cut off its tail and glued on a tiger's tail, even though the tail was longer than the whole animal, and you color matched the fur, but left the stripes, even though the body was spotted. Then you gave it some orange eyes because you missed the orange from the tiger, and they still turned out cute as a button. That's what they look like. They're cool little animals, but civets they are not. They're barely even feliforms. In fact, they are the hagfish of Feliformia. I just want to mention that we have a really long and incredible discussion about the ethics of AI for all of our stinking rad fans at Patreon. So if you'd like to see that, it is a doozy. Consider checking it out. The remaining feliforms fall into two clades: the Phyloidea, which includes the cats, and the Viveroidea, which includes the civets. Neither of these two clades are more closely related to African palm civets than the other, and each one contains a candidate for what this might be. So let's start with the Viveroidea, so we can find out what a civet actually is. But again, remember that civets are no more closely related to African palm civets than are any of the other members of these two clades. And they are more closely related to all of the members of both of these clades than they are to African palm civets. But the Viveroid family most distantly related to all of the other Viveroids is the family Viveridae. The 33 species of civets, palm civets, excluding the African palm civet, genets, oyans, and the popcorn-smelling binturong. And just to ruin your day, the binturong is just another palm civet. So I suggest that we rename it the popcorn palm civet, as is the otter civet. It ought to be a palm civet too. So lots of things are palm civets, just not African palm civets. But you know what palm civets aren't? Civets, which are closer to oyans and genets. But just look at all these weasel kitties and possum cats. Some of them really look a lot like a ferret and a cat had a baby. The word Viveridae even means ferret in Latin, though we're in the wrong clade to be talking about ferrets. So they aren't ferrets, and they definitely aren't possums, but they are so adorable. They're found in Africa, Asia, and Europe. They're small to medium-sized, though binturongs are relatively large. Popcorn palm civets. They're pretty big, like the size of a standard poodle. But most of them are pretty small by comparison, more like the size of a house cat. And, like a house cat, they have somewhat retractable claws and a rough tongue. But they have a longer muzzle than cats, and their shearing teeth are somewhat less specialized. It's an amazingly cute and fun group, and it probably deserves its own video eventually. The rest of the Viveroids fall into the clade Herpistoidea, which contains 3 families. And the third wheel of this clade are these, the 3 species of hyenas and the aardwolf of the family Hyenidae, which really look like dogs, or wolves, apparently, but are more closely related to cats, and even more so to mongooses. As hunters, though, they are much more similar to dogs. Their claws are non-retractable and are used more like cleats than like knives, and if you don't understand the difference, you've been playing soccer all wrong. And given that cleats make lousy knives, they use their strong jaws almost exclusively to dispatch their prey. It also means that they're lousy climbers. I do not recommend climbing trees with cleats on your hands and feet. So they are runners. Not the only runners among the Feliformia. In fact, there is a cat that is similar to the hyenas in all of these ways, the cheetah. But hyenas hunt more like dogs even than they do like cheetahs. Cheetahs are adapted for speed, but not endurance. Hyenas and dogs are almost the opposite of that. Pursuit hunters that sometimes simply run prey to exhaustion. A cheetah cannot do that. Almost all of the animals that cheetahs hunt can run for longer than they can, just not faster. However, in most other ways, hyenas are more like their feliform cousins. But when it comes to hunting and the adaptations for hunting, they are very convergently similar to dogs. So why would a feliform be so much like a dog in a world with dogs? That's a great question. Today, hyenas are found only in Africa, but they originated in Eurasia and were once very widely distributed in that region. And many of them were even more like dogs in form and function than what we see today. Because hunting like a dog, it works. It's different than hunting like a cat, but it works. In some cases, better than hunting like a cat. And at one point in time, in Eurasia and Africa, there were no dogs. Canids evolved in North America, so that niche was wide open. And yes, that is not only a correct English pronunciation of the word niche, it was the only pronunciation of the word in English until recently when people decided to French it up. And in the same way, hyenas were the only dog-like carnivorans on that side of the planet until just a few million years ago when the Beringian land bridge allowed canids into Asia for the first time. And it seems that, by and large, canids are even better at being dogs than our hyenas. As a result, the primarily insectivorous aardwolf is the only surviving member of the more dog-like hyenas. The other three are from a different clade of hyenas called bone-crushing hyenas, which can hunt, but also make excellent scavengers. What I'm saying is that the canids won the battle for top dog. And those hyenas that persisted were those that occupied slightly different niches than their canid competitors. And this is actually a common theme that we're going to see between the Feliformia and the Caniformia. Because the Feliforms originated in Africa and Eurasia, and the Caniforms originated in North America. Essentially in two different worlds. And in those two worlds, they evolved to fill many of the same niches. So you see a lot of convergence in the two clades, especially before their worlds collided. And there are situations just like this, not only between Feliforms and Caniforms, but even within the groups, like with this place, Madagascar. In our video about all of the Afrotheria, we discussed the fact that for much of the history of mammals, Africa was its own little world. And as such, it only had a small subset of mammal lineages, which subsequently radiated out to fill many of the mammal niches. Well, off the coast of Africa lies Madagascar, an island off the coast of an island with very few lineages and many open niches. And just like what we saw with the lemurs filling all of the primate niches, as well as being woodpeckers, when the first carnivorans arrived on the Inception Island, they were like, "What's up, my niches?" And they diversified all over that hizzy. And this single lineage of feliforms are today known as the family Eupleridae, also called Malagasy mongooses, which are only arguably mongooses. They are the closest living relatives of the true mongooses, so they can all be mongooses, or not. They're the hagfish of mongooses. But no matter what you call them, they're rad. And one of the 10 extant species might be the one that we're seeing here. So what is this thing? Well, in our first TikTok reaction video, I said that I thought it was a fossa, or fossa. This. And that is because it is a very cat-like creature, but with a rather long body. Shortish legs, but a very long tail, and a long face, like a stretch cat. And in Madagascar, there is such a beast, the fossa. Well, it isn't a cat, though it is arguably a mongoose, as is the rest of the family. All of the Malagasy mongooses can trace their lineage to a single colonization event from Africa. They are all more closely related to one another than they are to anything else. And though the fossa is probably the best known of the Malagasy mongooses, it is actually a pretty odd member of the group. Others include the closest living relative to the fossa, the Malagasy civet. I'll give you one guess what that isn't. A civet. Let's face it, the common ancestor of all feliforms probably looked like a civet. So there be fake civets all over the place in this clade. You can distinguish it easily from the true civets by figuring out if you're in Madagascar or not. This group also includes the Phalanaux and the Vontsiras. A couple of the Vontsiras are often called mongooses and not Vontsiras, and that can be okay. Just know that they're also Vontsiras, and if they're mongooses, so are all of the other endemic Malagasy carnivorans. But it's a cute group of things that look like mongooses, civets, red pandas, and cats, but that are, at best, none of these things, except for mongooses. I love that red panda weasel. So I think this creature may have been a fossa, but I have no idea if this video comes from Madagascar. And the fact that the head and body appear to be slightly different shades of brown has me doubting that this truly is what we're seeing here. There is another creature that fits this description on the other side of the world. So we'll have to check out that possibility as well. But first, we have to talk about the closest relatives of the Malagasy mongooses. The 34 species of non-Malagasy mongooses of the family Herpestidae, some of which are frequently called meerkats and kusimanses. But unless you kick out 6 species of mongooses and all of the Malagasy mongooses as well, then they're totally mongooses too. And just so you know, mongooses is the more broadly accepted plural of mongoose, though mongoose is also acceptable. But nobody calls multiple meerkats meerkitties. Mongooses of the unquestionably mongoosish variety are found in Europe, Africa, and Asia. And they are incredible hunters. Many are notorious for hunting large and sometimes dangerous prey, such as scorpions and cobras. And they are highly immune to the neurotoxins of elapid snakes. And that takes us to the other major clade of the Feliformia, the even more cat-like Phyloidea, which does include the cats. And these, the 2 species of linsangs of the family Prianodontidae, which also very much show that ancestral feliform body plan. Long body, long tail, with a face longer than that of a cat. Morphologically, it looks like a civet, and every other feliform that people want to call a civet. Thank goodness for molecular phylogenetics, which can give us a window into evolutionary history that is much less biased by human perceptions and similarities due to convergence. Like I said previously, this is likely the ancestral body plan of feliforms. If you saw the common ancestor of the group, it probably looked basically like a civet. And that body plan has been very successful across Asia, Africa, and Europe, with some groups landing in places like Africa and Madagascar, which had a lot of open niche space, allowing feliforms to diversify down paths that are generally unavailable in parts of the world where other lineages have filled those spaces. But just because a few lineages have changed dramatically, that doesn't mean that this ancestral form ceases to be successful. And so most of the lineages still look something like these guys, even though they aren't necessarily one another's closest relatives. Linsangs, true linsangs, come from Southeast Asia. And I say true linsangs because the oyans that we discussed earlier, part of the Viveridae, they are sometimes called linsangs, but they clearly are not. I say clearly, but again, if all you had to work with was morphology, you'd probably call them all civets. The reality is that based on the clear molecular data, if you want to include another group into the oyans, it would be these, the hagfish of oyans, the 41 species of cats of the family Felidae, which, despite being the namesake of the Feliformia, might be the weirdest of all feliforms. And is anyone else surprised that there are only 41 species? I tell you what, go ahead and subscribe and I'll make a video doing a deep dive into this group in the next couple of months. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to talk about them today. That would be outrageous, and we still need to figure out what this is. In general, you can probably distinguish a cat from most animals, though a few other feliforms might trip you up. Cats have fully retractable claws, except for cheetahs, which aren't big cats, not even close, but we'll get into that in a couple of months. They have somewhat shorter faces, shorter bodies, and shorter tails compared to most other feliforms. Originally evolving in Asia, they have also been very successful in Africa and are the only extant feliform lineage to have successfully colonized the Americas at the time when the Caniformia made their way into Asia. Though there was a North American hyena for most of the last 5 million years. In general, the Caniformia has won the battle between the two clades, but felids, more than any other lineage, have managed to hold their own. They've not only managed to persist in the presence of caniforms, but in many cases are the apex predators in the regions where they're found. Some tigers, for example, even specialize in hunting bears. They may not have the endurance of dogs, but as we said in the beginning, they have exceptional weapons and athletic ability. There is only one predator on Earth that I would fear even perched atop an adult elephant. I'll give you a hint. It's not a dog. They range in size far, far more than do other feliform lineages. From the rusty spotted cat, which weighs less than 2 kilos, to the Siberian tiger, which can weigh over 300 kilos. They have excellent vision, keen intelligence, and are experts of ambush. They are the fastest running animals alive, have astounding leaping ability, skull splintering bite force, and there is considerable evidence that they domesticated humans. It includes many cats that look a lot like house cats, including the other members of the genus Felis, but also from other groups like the genus Prionolorus and most of the genus Leopardus, even though my favorite cat, also part of that genus, doesn't look that much like a house cat in my opinion. Some look more like bobcats and lynxes, and some are big cats like lions, tigers, and the diversity of things we call leopards. But there is in the Americas a cat that is one of the closest relatives of the African cheetah that looks like, well, more like a fossa than it does like most cats. Which isn't to say that it doesn't look like a cat, but fossas look a lot like cats, despite not being cats. They're cats like lemurs or monkeys. This is a jaguarundi. They live in the Americas, mostly in Central America and South America east of the Andes Mountains, but also in Mexico. It has a long body and relatively short legs, with a long tail and a head that is slightly different in color from the body, which at this point I'm about 90% sure is the animal that we're seeing here. I still don't know where this video was filmed, but jaguarundis are active mostly during the day, have very similar colors and a similar shape. The head shape is the only thing that still has me doubting a bit, but the longer I look at this, the more I think that the unidentified creature from this video is a jaguarundi. So I think I got this one wrong before. What do you think? Well, I think that this brings us to the end of the feliforms, which brings us to the other major clade of the carnivorans, arguably the more successful of the two clades, the Caniformia, which includes everything from giant pandas to red pandas to trash pandas, walruses to wolves to weasels, and everything in between. Not the kind of thing that you jam into the end of a video that is already pretty long and intense. And so we're gonna reenact the evolutionary history of these two groups. We'll keep them separate, but not too far apart. We'll release a second video about the caniforms later this month. And then, later this year, we'll bring the two groups together and release a supercut of the two videos, just in case you disagree with the offspring and you don't think that we gotta keep them separated. So now would be a good time to subscribe and click the little bell if you want to see any of that. As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon.
What?
Well, I'm just thinking about my intro here. I'm like, well, hi there. This is a cat. They were like, what's up, my niches? And they diversified all over that hizzy.
Wow.
Just for you, Will.
Wow. We're gonna get in trouble for that.
Some of which are frequently called meerkats and cusimances.
Cusimances.
Are the only extant feliform lineage to have successfully colonized the Americas at the time when the Caniformia made their way into Asia.
They cross paths.
Mm-hmm.
High-fiving each other.
Well, potentially. House cats are not domesticated. They're just a wild cat that has figured out that it can get stuff from us. And unfortunately, sometimes we cut off your testicles. Like, whoops, that went sideways. We went for a ride in a car. I was like, everything's going great. And then